Hello, my name is Charmaine de Macalangan, and I will be presenting the case of dioxin contamination in Da Nang, Vietnam. The purpose of this presentation is threefold. First, to show a brief overview of Agent Orange, dioxin in Da Nang, Vietnam. Second, to present dioxin contamination in areas in Da Nang and in blood levels in Da Nang residents. And third, to illustrate dioxin exposure and its effects over a long period of time. Here is a breakdown of the figures covered in this presentation. First is a graph with spatial data showing Agent Orange spray emissions in southern Vietnam, followed by a chart showing dioxin content in soil and sediment samples from Da Nang Air Base. Next is a flowchart of the movement of dioxin to humans, followed by a graph showing blood dioxin levels in Da Nang residents. The last graph will show data on observed deaths of a population in Seveso, Italy after an industrial dioxin exposure after 20 years. Then the presentation will end with a summary and a list of references. Let's begin with the city of Da Nang. Da Nang is a coastal city and the fourth biggest city in Vietnam. It is a halfway point between the capital Hanoi in the north and Ho Chi Minh in the south. Da Nang played an important role in the Vietnam War, where a lot of major fights happened in the 1968 Tet Offensive. Now, what is Agent Orange? Agent Orange is a defoliant or herbicide that was used by the U.S. military during the U.S.-Vietnam War between 1961 to 1971. Contained in Agent Orange are dioxins or dioxin-like compounds, a group of dangerous chemicals known as persistent organic pollutants, or POPs. These were sprayed to destroy jungle hideouts of Vietnamese soldiers throughout the country. According to Vietnamese Red Cross, there were 2.1 to 4.5 million Vietnamese who had direct exposure to dioxin around this wartime. If you look into this map of South Vietnam, the heavily shaded areas in orange were locations where aerial spray emissions of Agent Orange were done. About 2.2 million gallons of Agent Orange were sprayed in Da Nang alone, which explain why the city still suffers dioxin contamination up to this day. This table shows the maximum recorded dioxin content in soil and sediment samples in Da Nang Air Base from an actual study conducted by the Hatfield Group in 2007. Samples were taken on the former mixing and loading area, former storage area, drainage system, and lakes surrounding Da Nang Air Base, which is a major dioxin hotspot. The sample that showed the highest concentration of dioxin is 365%, higher than the global standard limit. According to Aspen Institute, the general environmental limit in most countries is 1,000 parts per trillion toxic equivalent in soils and 100 parts per trillion in sediment. Even most industrialized countries have dioxin concentrations in soils of less than 12 parts per trillion, so these recorded levels of dioxin are worrisome. This illustration shows the movement of dioxin from contaminated areas to humans. Dioxin settles in soil and at the bottom of lakes and rivers for generations. It moves into humans through ingestion of contaminated fish or direct contact with the soil and sediments. Not only does dioxin take effect to those who had direct exposure, but exposed residents pass it on through their offspring, some through mother's breast milk. The people most affected in Da Nang are fish farmers inside the Da Nang Air Base perimeter and those who consume fish and other aquatic animals from the airport lakes. Now this chart shows a study made in 2009 assessing blood dioxin levels in residents living around Da Nang Air Base. It reveals that these levels exceed all international standards and are more than 100 times greater than globally accepted. Just to have a point of comparison, the highest level recorded was from a fisherman in the Da Nang Air Base at 1410 parts per trillion, when the US acceptable level, same for other industrialized countries, is only 3 to 7 parts per trillion. So what are the long-term effects of dioxin exposure? Although more research has to be done to prove the chronic effects of Agent Orange to Da Nang residents, other studies have been conducted to follow individuals exposed to dioxin. One sample is data shown in this graph following a population exposed to dioxin after the Seveso, Italy industrial accident in 1976. Based on observed number of deaths in a span of 20 years after exposure, the data suggests that residents living in highly contaminated territory were at increased risk to some death causes, specifically cancer-related. All cancer deaths were significantly in excess after 15 years, and the increase was significant in the highest exposed zone. Local studies conducted by the Vietnamese Red Cross have shown that an estimated of 1 million people have disabilities or other health problems associated with Agent Orange, approximately 100,000 of them being disabled children. Although there is no specific and proven number yet, it doesn't deny the fact that more outreach efforts are needed to support Da Nang families and communities affected by Agent Orange. In summary, dioxin contamination from Agent Orange missions in the past is still a pressing issue in present Da Nang, Vietnam. The Da Nang Air Base and surrounding lakes still remain to be a dioxin hotspot, and international agencies call for urgent environmental remediation. Lastly, further research has to be done to assess the long-term effects of Agent Orange to Da Nang residents, particularly to connect this exposure to Da Nang infants and children who suffer from birth defects. Moreover, it is important to note that studies have proved long-term exposure to dioxin to cause increased risk to cancer-related death causes.